Here at the 21st Annual La Jolla Energy Conference with Professor David Morris, Professor of Political Science at University of California, San Diego, and also the Baker Institute Scholar for Latin American Energy Studies at the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy at Rice University in Houston. Good to have you with us, David.
Thank you.
This morning we had an interesting roundtable, and you were part of that. And that roundtable over breakfast looked at the issue of the ascendancy of Western Hemisphere energy production, and we talked about the question, is the Western Hemisphere the new global energy capital? And you made some interesting points to that to that question, and I want to sort of follow up with that here in this interview. You talked about the difference between having the resource potential and overcoming some hurdles to actually develop those resources into reality. We talked a little bit about Argentina, for example, with tremendous unconventional resources. Energy Information Administration said second largest in Latin America, but we have a little political situation recently. Talk a little bit about, do you think the geopolitical order of the energy world is shifting from, say, the Middle East to our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere? And what are some of the issues politically and otherwise?
Well, I wouldn't use the word shifting. What's happening is the potential for the Western Hemisphere to produce much more has suddenly increased. But it's not that the Middle East is going to be marginalized. There's still a lot of resources in the Middle East, gas and oil, and they're cheaper to get at, and the infrastructure is developed. So they're going to be a player in the market. What we've got is not even a case of the Western Hemisphere can balance the Middle East, because the Middle East gets a lot of its influence via OPEC. It's not the only region in OPEC. Venezuela's in OPEC. Ecuador is back into OPEC. You know, it's not inconceivable that down the road Brazil could wind up in OPEC.
Really?
It's not inconceivable.
Okay.
Not everybody in OPEC is a radical country. So, you know, OPEC is still going to be a force to deal with. All right. All we're going to be able to do if our resources come online in the Western Hemisphere is balance out some of their influence. But it's not that there's going to be this wholesale shift from the Middle East used to be the place where everybody had to be, and now suddenly nobody cares about the Middle East, and we move over to everybody has to be in the Western Hemisphere. The Middle East is still going to be extremely important for Asia, and therefore it's going to be extremely important for the United States. The United States can't possibly be indifferent to whether the Middle East can supply Asia, because if Asia can't get it from the Middle East, it'll get it from somewhere else. And that's going to upset markets. If Asia can't get resources, that might make them more radical politically, and that's certainly not in the U.S. side. So it's not that the U.S. is going to be able to say adios Middle East, even in geopolitical terms. But the potential is certainly there for the Middle East influence to diminish. Now, for that to happen, Latin America's got to do its part. Because Canada and the United States have a lot of resources. Those resources are going to come online. Latin America has historically had lots of resources, and sometimes they come online and sometimes they don't.
It's a great point, and one of the things I think you talk about Ecuador coming back into OPEC, one of the factoids recently that I found so interesting is that the North Dakota production on a daily basis is on par daily production in the entire nation of Ecuador, which sort of speaks to both parts of what you were talking about, how predominant the North American element of this production outlook for the Western Hemisphere, but also what some of the issues are facing, you know, in this case, Ecuador. Let's take it to a couple other countries, another OPEC member, Venezuela, but let's talk about Venezuela, Argentina, and Mexico. Because when we talk about significant volumes needing to come online to even have a little bit of an impact, you might not agree with the adios OPEC or the adios Middle Eastern geopolitical dominance, but at least this sort of a little bit of balancing you mentioned. What about Argentina? What about Venezuela? But what about Mexico?
Yeah.
Three easy ones to deal with here.
I'm glad you didn't throw Brazil into the mix.
No, we'll leave that. We only have a couple minutes here. So
Well, I mean, Venezuela clearly indicates the challenges that we face, all right? Because Venezuela in the 90s was talking about getting up to 5-6 million barrels a day, right? That was before they found all of this extra stuff, right? They never made it. And it's not because they don't have the resource.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not because companies aren't interested in getting the resource. It's because the environment in which you could get the kinds of investment that would allow you to develop the industry to that level just never panned out.
Right.
You know, so Venezuela, now Chavez is talking about 6-7 million barrels a day. All right? They have the potential to do that.
Right.
Whether they're going to get there, probably with this Venezuelan government, no. You know, Chavez is seriously ill. Nobody knows if he's going to make it or not.
Right.
You know, if he doesn't make it, there are going to be changes. My sense is that nobody can be Hugo Chavez.
Sure.
So even a new government that would come in with Chavistas would still find it in their interest to increase production. And you could make incentives for companies to increase their investments in Venezuela without throwing out the current laws. It's just the way that Chavez has interpreted those laws is the problem, or that's one of the problems.
Sure.
In the case of Argentina, the potential there is in gas and shale gas.
Right.
They, in a sense, they're not the same as Venezuela, because Venezuela was already proved and companies were in there, and they're trying to stay in there. In the Argentine case, it's still very speculative at this point. You know, you've got to explore in order to know just exactly how much shale gas is recoverable there.
And we've been hearing a lot about this technology issue and trying to, you know, there's a lack of infrastructure that needs to be in place for some of these massive developments.
Yeah, infrastructure, capital. You know, Argentina has a very underdeveloped national capital market, and they're kind of frozen out of the international capital markets.
There's some issues there.
You know, so where are you going to get the capital for these very expensive projects? Particularly early ones that you know, are still very speculative. So Argentina is going to face a number of challenges in the future that are made more difficult by the fact that this government's policies are not very credible. They offer something this year and they take it away before the end of the year. Right? You know, I think Mexico is the one that is the most promising of the three. We know Mexico has significant resources. Some of them are speculative, like how much is in the Gulf. I mean, the fact that Repsol drilled off Cuba and came up dry means just because you put a popote into the ground doesn't mean you're going to get it even in the Gulf, right?
It is the oil business.
But it does have, you know, as we heard today, it has a lot of oil still in Chicontepec. Cantarell can still get more out. And they're going to have more oil. Okay? And they have shale resources. It's a continuation of that Texas strip. So we can have better confidence in Mexico. I think the whole political situation in Mexico is moving towards important reforms in the energy sector.
Right.
And that's going to attract capital. They're right next door to the United States. That capital and equipment can come easily. You know, I'm actually quite excited by the possibilities in Mexico in the next few years.
It seems like one of the things, I think you're absolutely right, and there's a big election coming, and there could be some rather important changes. The one final question about Mexico is, you know, whether or not so much they're running out of oil, but are they running out of time to leverage that resource, you know, and bring it to bear and capture its potential for the nation? I think maybe that's what this debate in the political circle is all about.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we can think about time in lots of different ways. There's geological time, right? There's national history time. There's the time for a particular administration. And I think, you know, particularly if Peña Nieto is the winner, all indications are that he's going to be, but particularly if he is the winner, you know, it's Peña Nieto and it's PRI, and they're going to want to have a successful sexenio. So the next one that comes will also be a PRI president. And so that means making the kinds of changes early in the administration so you could start to attract that capital, so you can start to get more confidence that the sector is going to change, because even these investments are going to take years to pay off.
Yeah.
But Peña Nieto's got to show that, in fact, the energy industry is promising for Mexico.
And that's just a final point, I think, one of the interesting comparisons we've heard about what Cardoso did in Brazil is early in the administration, right out of the gate almost, hit a major oil policy reform. So let's see what happens in Mexico this December or next January. Well, David, thanks so much. It's been wonderful having you. Enjoyed the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks.
Okay.